Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today we are doing solo builds. That's right, this week is all solo builds and we're starting off with my favorite class for solo play, the Templar. So this one is the Lord Knight build from my previous stuff in the last chapter or DLC, whatever it was, release in Dragon Bones. I released a solo build called the Lord Knight, and this is a reiterated version of that. So this one's been upgraded, redone, because of now two-handed and bows and staves being counted as two-piece. We are actually using a 5-piece set, or two 5-piece sets and a monster set with this build, and this is one of many setups you can use. So I'm going to be showing several different builds this week, not all on Templar, different, each class, you know, with different setups, but this is my preferred setup because, as you can see out the door, 25k health, 30k stamina, 10k magicka, and we only need about a 10k magicka to make the build really work. But you really want about a 25k health to make a solo build work well, and there's a reason for it. When you solo play in ESO, you're not just playing in overland content and doing world bosses and doing public dungeons and doing the dolmens and the abyssal geysers and things like that. You're actually able to play solo through dungeons. Not all dungeons. Most dungeons you can play through solo, and in veteran mode too. So you can solo them both in normal and veteran. And the builds I'm releasing this week to go into this more, because I'm going to go over this build again, this stats and everything, but solo builds can be played in any content. So you can play these also in groups if you want. They do pull good DPS with the right makeup. Roughly about 20 to 25k DPS. So, and that really just depends on the group dynamic. So these can be played in groups, but I advise you letting your people know that you're playing this particular build, because that way they can say, okay, we know what you're playing, we understand why you're playing it, and that, so on and so forth. So as you can see, again, 10k magicka, 25k health, 30k stamina. We do have an 815 recovery. This is perfect for this particular setup, because you don't want too high of magic recovery, but 800 is really in a good, like, the good play, like this, what I call the sweet spot. Our stamina recovery is 1,183. Our spell damage we don't need to worry about. Weapon damage is 3130 with a 31% crit, and when you use your potion, oops. Your crit goes to 41%. Now, I know the crit seems kind of low, but that's okay. You only need the crit there, mainly to proc the debuff from your character, because this thing has a debuff on the armor that puts a massive major fracture on your enemies. And the thing is that if you use certain abilities, it can apply that major fracture to multiple targets. So it's actually a really good combination. The weapon damage, as you can see, 3679. This thing can get up to, depending on group dynamics, up to almost 5k weapon damage. So it's in there. It's good. It does do a decent amount of damage, like I said, but because it is made for solo play and not group dynamics or group play, it just really overall survivability, damage, all that stuff. We have good spell resistance coming in at 19k. Physical resistance is 16k. This is, you really want to get this up to about 20k when buffed when you're solo playing. We are running the Warrior Mundus Stone with the Dubius Camron Throne, and there is a reason why we are using Dubius Camron Throne. One, it gives you a decent amount of health and stamina, but it's because of that max recovery. Now, depending on the race you're choosing, like with Redguard, Dubius Camron Throne works the best on Redguard, Orcs, Nords, things like that, because Orcs and Nords get health boosts already, and but they don't get any, like, they get a decent stamina boost, so it works really good on them. High Elves, or sorry, Wood Elves, it's not that great. but it still works on them, and you can still get about the same stat pools with any race. So you can still pull this 25k health, 30k stamina with any race. But again, it comes down to your choice of food. So with some, Dubious Camron Throne's going to play better. Like with a Wood Elf, you want to use dual stat food that gives you the health and stamina, no recovery. Moving on to the gear, there's a reason why we play this build the way we do with the sets we're playing with. And I do want to go over the food here again. So this is Dubious Camron Throne. And you're going to want to use the power pots, the ones that give you stamina, major savagery, and major brutality for the extra crit and the extra weapon damage. You're going to want to use those, and you're going to want to keep those up constantly. Especially depending on what content you're doing. If you're doing solo overland content, you don't need to use pots that often. If you're doing solo dungeons, like if you're solo playing dungeons, you're going to want to use pots. And if you're solo playing vet content, you're definitely going to want to use pots. So going over the gear sets, Bloodspawn, and I know what a lot of people are going to say, why are you running Bloodspawn on a solo build? Wouldn't a damage dealing proc set be better? Yes and no. Yes, it does help to have that proc set to do some extra damage, and I would suggest if you were going to do that, use something like Celine's, Krog's, something to that degree. But because of the way this build works, that ultimate gen is what you want, because you're going to be dropping Dawnbreaker as much as you can. That's how this build works, is it works off of Dawnbreaker. So getting that ultimate gen of 14 as quickly as possible really helps you out in keeping that damage output. So that's why we're using Bloodspawn, and it also gives you really good survivability, like way more than you need. Moving on, we are using a 5-piece Nightmothers. Nightmothers is like the ultimate solo set. It can work for two-handed tanking as well, and it does work for some DPS builds still, but it's mostly going to be used for solo builds because of the fact that it does the 2 crit, the weapon damage, and then when you deal critical damage, you apply major fracture. Now, it is only best used on Templars and Sorks. If you're playing a DK who's using Noxious Breath, who can apply major fracture, a Warden who can apply major fracture through their Subterranean Assault, or a Nightblade using Surprise Attack to get the major fracture. If you're using one of them 3, you don't need this set. You can actually run Hunting's Rage with it. So, really good combination there. Now remember, with the solo build, you always want to try and get that 25k health with that 30k stamina. So with this build, we are running the Nightmothers with all infused on the big pieces. With stamina, the smaller pieces, we have nirnhoned on the glove and the belt. Because the belt is light armor, you do want that nirnhoned, and you do want that nirnhoned on the gauntlets. You want that survivability. Divines, you don't want here. This is my bad, I forgot to change that. You want reinforced on the shoulders and stuff, and I'll show you why real quick. And I think I remember why I did this now. So on that, the reason you want that Divines, or you want that reinforced, if you look, 38-13 versus with nirnhoned, 27-26. So reinforced actually works better on anything over 2,000 armor. Anything under that, you want to go nirnhoned, because nirnhoned will give you the greater amount of resistances. Anything above 2,000, you want to go reinforced. So need to go ahead and do this. Now that I remember why I did that. Alright. So you want to go on the gear, you want to go all stamina. All stamina. Because that's going to give you the greater amount of stamina pool on this. And we are wearing a 5-1-1 setup, all heavy. You can go medium. You're not going to have the survivability and resistances with it. But you can go medium with this build. I just prefer heavy. And then, as you can see, like I said, nirnhoned on the smaller piece, on these 2 pieces, the gloves and the belt, and then reinforced on the shoulder and boots, infused on everything else. This will give you a massive amount of stamina. Now, moving on to the other set we're running, the other 5-piece. The other 5-piece set is an pretty normal set for most people in Overland, and that is Plague Doctors. But if you look, we have all infused on the jewelry. We are not using healthy jewelry, we're using infused. And the reason we're using infused is this gives us more potential to our build, and it gives us that good balance of having that 25k on a red guard. Now on a Nord or an Orc, you will have a greater health pool, and your stamina pool might be a little bit lower, but you can make up that difference, like I said. So really, really good payout here in the long run with the Plague Doctors and with the infused. Now on the jewelry, you want to go 2 weapon damage, and on the necklace, go magic recovery. Now the reason you want to go magic recovery is because you want to have an 800 or higher magic recovery for this build, because you're only using 1 or 2 magic abilities, but you want to keep a consistency of those magic abilities so they work to the effect that you want. Now moving on to the weapons, we are using 2 weapons, 2 different weapons here. We are using a 2-handed and a bow. On the 2-handed, we are using a nirnhoned Plague Doctor's Greatsword. This gives us weapon or greater weapon damage, but it also gives us poison damage. And it doesn't matter, you don't lose anything when you swap bars with this. So this is a really good combination. Nirnhoned on the front bar because it gives you that greater amount of weapon damage, and you can use any enchant here you want, really. I just chose poison damage because you are using physical damage, so getting that extra damage in there is really good. You can use a magic enchant, you can use a fire enchant, you can use whatever you want. I just prefer this. On the back bar, we're using an infused bow with weapon and spell damage. We're not on the back bar too often. It's mainly there for that weapon damage buff. But we do have skills that we're using on our back bar to kind of give us the greater benefit. And speaking of skills, we're going to move on to those. Make sure you get all your class passives. It's really important, especially with this build. You want all your class passives because you are going to be using abilities from most of them. Which I really need to go back and do this real quick. Because that is really good on the back bar. So make sure you get all your class passives. Make sure you get all your weapon passives. Very important. When it comes to your armor, make sure you get the top 3 of the light armor passives. Medium armor, you want the top 2 and the bottom one. And then heavy armor, you want to fill them all in. On the world skills, you can be a werewolf or vampire with this, which is really great because it gives you that greater benefit. So you can go with either one of those with this build because you're not in a group, so you can be a vampire or a werewolf. Moving on to the guild, Fighters Guild, you want all the passives for the Fighters Guild. You don't need the bottom 2, but the top 3 are very important. You want that 15% reduced cost. Now this only applies to abilities like Silverlesh, Trap Beast, stuff like that, but we're not using either one of we're not using the Trap Beast, we are using Silverlesh. So here we have Flawless Dawnbreaker, which we do have on the front bar, which gives us 5% weapon damage, but because we also have a Fighter's Guild ability slotted, we do have Slayer, which gives us another 3%. So it's an 8% increase in our weapon damage. And then also with being a Templar, I want to point this out, we also get another 6% weapon damage. So Templars overall are the best with 2-handed weapons because of this. They get a massive bonus in weapon damage. So... but they're the only class. So I'm just letting you know, they do get a lot of weapon damage. But like I said, Fighters Guild, also Banish the Wicked if you're solo playing dungeons. You want that ultimate chin as much as you can because Dawnbreaker, you are going to be getting a lot of ultimate. Mages Guild, Persuasive Will is all you really need. Psijic Order, you're going to want all the passives on that. And then the Undaunted, you want the bottom 2, and if you are playing in a 2-man group, because I will be going over this later this week, if you are playing in a 2-man group, having something like Inner Fire, having a ranged taunt for when you're playing with a group is really important, because you're going to be doing something called swap tanking. That means one of you is going to use a taunt, and you're going to let that taunt run through its time, so the boss is going to be focused on you, then you're going to swap and let the other guy grab taunt with the next one. And then you're not going to apply taunt until his taunt wears off, and you're going to go back and forth. And this is called swap tanking. So basically in a two-man solo build group setup, you're going to be bouncing between each other and taunting. Alliance, you don't really need anything. Racials, you want to make sure you get all your passives. And then crafting, alchemy, you want medicinal use. And in provisioning, you definitely want Gourmet and Connoisseur on this. But mainly on this one, you want the medicinal use, because you will be using pots a lot with this build. Whether you're in dungeons or trials, or sorry, dungeons or overland. Because you do solo a lot of content with this when it comes to bosses and stuff. Having that greater resource return, that greater damage output, all that kind of stuff really helps you out with this. But if you wanted to, and you're doing just overland, you don't even need to use pots, because you can use the Fighter's Guild ability Evil Hunter, and you can like swap some of this around and put Evil Hunter down here on both bars and just get rid of a few things. And I'll go over that in a minute. So going over the skills, with the first skill on the bar is Wrecking Blow. Wrecking Blow is going to be your main damage output ability. It's single target. It does a lot of damage, as you can see, 12k. This thing can crit up to like 25, 28, even sometimes 30k, depending on how much like penetration value you have on the enemy. And then on top of that, you're also going to get Empower for 5 seconds, to where your next light attack does 40% more damage. So you're going to want to keep this up quite a bit. The next ability on our bar is Brawler. This is going to give you a small damage shield, which is super important. It also does a decent amount of damage up front and a decent amount of damage over time. On top of that, each enemy you hit with this is going to make that damage shield bigger, so it's going to keep your survivability up while you're in dungeons and in public dungeons and doing dolmens, delves, abysmal geysers, you name it. It's going to help you keep your survivability up, because you'll never run out of damage shields. Next ability is a damage shield, Blazing Shield. This does 34% of your max health, so it gives you that back in a damage shield. You get about an 8k shield with this, but what's really important is what the blast effect does. When the shield expires, it deals 50% of the damage you've taken in back to the enemy. So it will do about roughly 4k damage output, along with the class passive in the Aedric Spear, called Burning Light, has a chance of proccing. As you can see, that's 5k extra damage. So in total, you can do 9k damage with that damage shield. That's the one magic ability I was telling you about you're going to want to keep up quite a bit, and that's why we need that 800 magic recovery. Next ability we have on our bar is Rally. Rally is going to be your primary heal, self-heal. This thing heals for a little bit over time. As you can see, you heal for 1,048 health every 2 seconds while active, and additional 1,624 when Rally expires. But the final heal is increased by up to 564%. So this thing can heal you up to 16k, if not more. And if it crit heals, it can heal you all the way up to 20k. The next ability we have on our bar is Race Against Time. Now, Race Against Time, awesome ability. Instant cast, minor force, and on a Templar is super, super huge. Minor force gives you an increase of 10% critical damage. So this is going to increase your critical damage, which you're probably thinking 40%. I'm not going to be critting too often. You actually crit a lot more than you think. With that 40%, or with the way our crit's set up, that 10% for minor force, along with the Templar's own piercing spear, which increases your critical damage by another 10%, you actually get a 20% increase in critical damage. And when you have this and this applied, along with your potions going, all that weapon damage, all your CP and everything, you end up with over a 40% increase in critical damage. So you have a 90% increase in critical damage over all other classes, which is a lot of critical damage. So this makes the solo play of the Templar a lot more. They get 6% weapon damage, they get this 10% critical damage, and then also having this slotted, you get Burning Light, which can be procced off of your Blazing Spear. You get Spear Wall, which increases the amount of damage you can block from melee attacks by 15%, which you do block a bit with this build, so there's a reason why our CP is set up the way it is. And we'll get to that. So it's just overall really good. The next ability is Flawless Dawnbreaker. Lots of damage up front, lots of damage over time, and then while slotted you get 5% increase in weapon damage, which you have an 8% because of the Fighter's Guild, and then that other extra 6%. You have a 34% with your rally to weapon damage. So that's why I said this is like the perfect setup for the Templar. So moving on to the back bar. On our back bar, we can change this ability out, or two of these abilities out with other abilities, but I prefer this setup myself. So the first ability we have is Silverlesh. Silverlesh is a great pull, so you can pull enemies to you that are at ranged, and that way, like spellcasters, healers, and it'll also interrupt when you grab them. If they're healing and you hit them with that, it'll pull them to you and it interrupts them. So it's a great ability to use to keep enemies closer to you, so you can keep that damage in, like output, better on them. The next one we have is a kind of unusual for a stamina build in PvE, but for solo play it's really good, and that is Binding Javelin. Another reason why we have Binding Javelin here is so we can get that Blazing Spear on the back bar, we can get the Spear Wall, and we can get that 6% extra weapon damage. We have those there for that reason, but it can also proc Burning Light with the spear. So this thing does 5k damage, as you can see with the tooltip, and when we're totally buffed up with our weapon damage and everything, this thing goes to over 5k weapon damage, and then on top of that it has a chance of proccing another 5k weapon damage. So you get, or almost 5k, so together both of them will do about 10k damage if you proc. So it's a really good combination when it works. So next up we have Endless Hail. This is great for just like putting an AoE in an area and just let that damage just, you know, go off on the enemies. And then of course the next ability we have is Resolving Vigor. Now this is a heal for you, but if you're playing with somebody else, you have an extra heal for them. So if you're playing by yourself, or you're playing in a two-man group, you have your own heal for you, and then you have a heal for somebody else. So it's kind of a cross thing, which makes it really good. Next up on our bar is Restoring Focus. This is a great ability. One thing you have to understand about this ability is you can place it. It's super cheap, 1777 Magicka. So you can place it, move out of it for 8 seconds, move back into it. It's going to give you Major Ward and Major Resolve, increasing both physical and spell resistance by 5,280. You also get Minor Vitality, increasing your healing received by 8%, and Minor Protection, reducing your incoming damage by 8%. So you get a really good amount of damage reduction and damage mitigation. So really good trade-off, plus really good healing received. Last but not least is the final ability, and that is Solar Disturbance. Now this you can change out with a lot of other things, like if you're playing with a two-man group, swap it out for Warhorn. Warhorn really comes in handy in group play, plus it's going to give you that 15% extra, so you go to 105% critical damage, which is crazy powerful. So Warhorn works out really good. It also boosts your stats a little, so it makes you a little bit more survivable, especially if you're dual running in a group, like in a two-man group, in a veteran dungeon. I mean, I've ran this build a lot, and I will tell you what, in veteran content, having Warhorn here is really awesome, but Solar Disturbance is really good when you're solo playing, because it just gives you that extra bit of, hey, I want to reduce the incoming damage from these guys, but I also want to apply some damage to them. It does good damage over time, and it does good damage up front, or good survivability also with the Major Maim, reducing the damage that the enemies do by 30% for 6 seconds. So it's a really good trade-off. You get both things, you get 2 in 1. You get damage and protection. So you get 2 things. Really, really good for solo play. But like I said, if you're in a small group and you guys are doing, let's say, any of the dungeon content, any other content, this is what you're going to want to keep up while you're doing that, and you're not going to worry so much about Dawnbreaker you're going to be keeping up Warhorn. And that's the other reason why I use the Bloodspawn with this, because I get that ultimate gen really fast. Because I do a lot of heavy attacks with this build and light attacks, so I'm generating a lot of ultimate. Now I'm going to go ahead and just show you guys a little bit about this build, but before I do that, of course, we're going to go over the CP. So moving on to the CP, starting with the RedTree, we have 56 in Ironclad. This reduces our incoming damage from direct damage by 20%. We have 56 in there. And then 23 into Thickskinned, reducing damage from damage over time by 23%. Damage over time effects. So poison, burning, bleeds, that kind of stuff. We get a 10% reduction. When you add in that 8% we get, it's actually an 18%. But that 18% actually, or that 8% actually applies to Hardy and Elemental Defender. So Hardy and Elemental Defender with 56 points into both. This one gives you physical poison disease damage reduction by 12%. And this gives you an extra Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 12%. When you add that 8% we get, that's a 20% damage reduction. And then when you add in something like this, you actually get another 30. So that goes to 30% damage reduction. This goes to 40% damage reduction from direct damage. So it's a really good, kind of combination there. But we're not done. Because of all this mitigation we also have all that armor resistance. Because when we're fully buffed up with our resistances here, and it doesn't matter what bar, we actually have, right here, we have a 37% spell resistance, so 37% mitigation. And this one here actually gives us, at 22, actually puts us at, I think it's a almost 30% damage mitigation. So we actually get extra damage mitigation from this stuff. This is the other reason why we use the 2 damage shields from Brawler and Blazing Shield, is so we can mitigate even more damage. So you get a lot of mitigation from those 2 shields, and if you stack them together, you get a decent amount of mitigation. Then you have all that damage reduction, plus all that resistance reduction. So you have a lot of mitigation with this build. That's why it's really good solo. Going back into the CP though, moving on to the last part of the RedTree, 40 into Bastion, this increases the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%, which is perfect for the way this build's set up. We also have 19 into Quick Recovery, increasing healing received by 5%. This stacks with the 8% healing received you get from the circle, your restoring focus, and the 8% you get from heavy armor passive. So those two together is 16%. When you add a 5% to it, it's a 21% increase healing received. And you have 8% healing done, because you also get minor mending in your restoring focus. So you get a lot of outgoing healing and incoming healing. Moving on, we have 26 in a Warlord. This reduces your break free cost by 11%. It saves you stamina if you need to use it. Sprinter, we're using this for the reduced sprint costs. And there's a reason why we're using heavy armor over medium armor. Heavy armor, when you do a heavy attack, you get more resources back. So it helps you keep your resource management really, really easily. But with this, 15% reduced sprint cost, and on top of that, we're also using that skill, acceleration, race against time, which also reduces our sprint cost by 50% for 3 seconds. So as long as we have this, we cast this, we can move really fast. But you really want to be careful with how much you're casting this. Like I said, every 12 seconds, you want to keep it up. But you also have other magic abilities, and you only have a 10k magicka. So you can use another food with this, by the way. And I do want to go over that real quick. If you wanted to, you could use Longfin Pasty food. And it will give you a little bit more health with it. So if you wanted to, you could use this. But it's also going to give you more magicka. So you're going to get more health, more magicka, and more stamina with this. But your stamina recovery is going to drop quite a bit. So you're going to have to do a lot more heavy attacks. But your magic recovery is still really where it needs to be. So that 800, as long as it's around 800, you're good. And with this, you can also use tripods. So you could go more tanky and use tripods with it. And it works out. But you really want that good stamina output versus, you know, like stamina magic combination. That's why we have the high stamina recovery with the decent magic recovery. So moving on to the middle tree over here, we have 43 in the Mooncalf. This gives us a 10% increase in our stamina recovery. Being Red Guard, we do have really good, you know, self-sustainability with stamina, but this gives us a little bit more. We have nothing in Arcanist. You don't really need it because, again, you're mostly a stamina build, so most of your stamina return is coming from your heavy attacks. So that's where we use Tenacity. Tenacity is going to give you really good stamina or magic or stamina return on your heavy attacks. So you can keep that stamina flow really good. And with that extra 1,000 you got coming in every 2 seconds, that plays into it. Moving on to the final tree here, we have 56 in a Shadow Ward. This reduces our block cost by 20%. We have 23 in a Tumbling, reducing our dodge roll cost. And then 1 in a Befoul. You don't really need the Befoul, but it still helps. Basically, the reason why you have so much into your block cost reduction is because you're soloing. You are going to be blocking quite a bit of attacks. So having that greater amount of reduced cost in blocking saves you a ton of resources. 23 into a Tumbling, you don't dodge roll a lot with this. You do dodge roll, but not like constant. You dodge roll when it's necessary. So that 10% can save you. Moving on to the blue tree, we have 43 into Bless. This increases your healing done by 10%. Really good with this build, because solo play, you need that extra outgoing healing for yourself. And then moving on to the middle tree, we have 40 in the Master at Arms. This just increases your direct damage done by 16%. We also do get Reposit and Retaliation, which are both really good, because whenever you block a heavy attack, your next light attack used within 7 seconds deals 30% more damage. And if you can pull it off in time, you can do a Wreaking blow, and you'll get not only 30% additional damage on your light attack, you get a 40%. So you get a 70% increase in your light attack damage, which is just absurd. Moving on over here, we have 43 into Mighty. This increases physical poison disease damage by 10%. This is a perfect amount for this build. Moving on, we have 56 in the Thaumaturge. This increases your damage done with damage over time abilities by 20%. This is the reason why we have this is for Endless Hail and for our Brawler. So, mainly Brawler. I don't know how much it affects Endless Hail. But for Brawler, it definitely improves that, and Dawnbreaker. Moving on, Precise Strikes. Increases critical damage and critical healing done with stamina abilities by 20%. We are using a stamina heal from Rally and a stamina heal from Vigor. So this is going to increase that critical healing you do from there by 20%, and then the critical damage by 20%. When you add in those two other factors of the 10% from the Race Against Time for the Minor Force, and then the 10% you get for being a Templar, that's a 40% increase. When you add Warhorde on top of that, that's a 105% increase. So it's really, really good. And then last but not least, 12 into Piercing, increasing your physical penetration by 1191. 1191 added onto the 5,000 and something only gives you about a 6k penetration. In Overland, the mobs only have a 9,100 resistance level. In dungeons, they go to 18,200. So you don't need a lot of penetration, even in a dungeon. So that you can still solo both normal and veteran dungeons with this build, because the value of resistance doesn't change. You just don't do as much damage as you possibly can, and that's fine. You don't need to worry about that. You're in there to solo it. But if you go in there and you go in with an extra person who's playing with you, whether they're a stamina build or a magic build, you both can play off of each other. So, like, you can use your healing and survivability, and they can use their healing and survivability, and you can both work together, and it makes the playthrough a lot easier. So, doing that in a group really works out. And if you put 4 of these together in a dungeon, you don't need a tank, you don't need a healer, you don't need anything. These guys will just melt that place. Like I said, 20 to 25k DPS with this build, 20 to 25k DPS with the Magicka builds. Actually, the Magicka builds do a little bit more because of how powerful they actually are. Is crazy. So, really works out really well, and it just works overall for a good group dynamic, like I said, because with this kind of setup you can use a lot of different things. You can also use dual wield with this, but I prefer two-handed. So I'm going to show you this build real quick, a little bit about it and everything. I'm not going to do a full parse on it, but I will show you how you can get this build to work out to your advantage. So we're going to go ahead and use our pot. Actually, I'm going to go back to my Dubius Camron throne. And then we're going to use our pot. We're going to put our circle down. We're going to go with Endless Hail first. Swap bars, and as soon as you swap bars, you're going to go Brawler, light attack, this, light attack, and you're just going to do Wrecking Blow and light attack. Now, if you're soloing a boss or something, if I can get it to work. It's really hard to get the Wrecking Blow light attack combo, but if you can get it and you can keep it up, like I said, you can keep up this rotation pretty easily, because it's just this and then Brawler, and like that's it. Like if you're just taking out a boss really quick and you want to get as much damage on it as possible, you're gonna just light attack, Wrecking Blow, light attack, Wrecking Blow. If you need resources, go into heavy attack, make sure your pot's going, kind of thing, like I said. And I can actually do better than this, guys. It's just for some reason it's not working to my advantage here. Today I'm just, my rotation activity is really wonky, but I have been able to pull up to 25k DPS with this build because of the way I have it set up. Mainly you want to keep acceleration, rally, and your circle protection, your pots up, so you get that greater amount of weapon damage and that crit and all that crit damage. And then of course you get all that good survivability. What I'm going to do real quick though is I'm actually going to take this build to a place and show you guys it in action, and we're going to go to Fang Lair. Now, I don't know if I have this set to normal or veteran. I really don't, but I'm going to show you guys how this build can work in a solo environment. So you guys can see, I have two-manned Fang Lair with this build and my Templar solo Magicka build. Like, I've taken the two in there, and me and the person that was playing them, we two-manned it on veteran, and it was awesome. It took a little while. It takes you a little bit longer, but it can be soloed. Now, we went in both normal. Normal, we wiped the floor at this place. On veteran, it took a little bit more because we had to be on our toes a little bit better. And there's a reason why you want this rotation to be like this, with the Wrecking Blow and then light attack. Wrecking Blow, light attack. See how I'm hitting all the targets? And you want to keep acceleration up too. Rally is really important to keep up, because you want that incoming heal, and if you need a little bit more, go ahead and do that. Dawnbreaker. And if you need health really fast, just get Vigor going, and then go back and pop Rally. Because Rally will heal you, like I said, twice. So you get 2 heals out of Rally. You want to keep Rally up a lot. You also want to keep that acceleration up. And that's the other reason why you want that one ability there, is because this guy will mess you up, and if you have both your shields going, oops, Like I said, getting that pull, it can really save you some stuff there. And you don't need the resistance buff all the time. It's nice to have, though. And there we go, that rally, just full health. So it's a matter of just understanding and playing and focusing on what's going to give you the right, you know, amount of stuff. And like I said, when you're playing this with another person, with another solo build of mine, like any of the other solo builds, it doesn't matter if it's stamina, magicka, you guys can keep like your stuff going super well. So but there you guys go. I'm just gonna let myself die now because you guys can see for yourselves. This build is pretty self-explanatory when it comes to survivability and everything. This thing can outlast most builds I've played when it comes to solo play. Like, it's a really good overall solo setup. I wouldn't say it's the best one I've ever made, but by far it's the funnest one I've ever made, and it has just overall gameplay wise, this build has outlasted any build I've ever played in the past, because I'm still playing it today. Right now on live, I play this same exact build almost on a Wood Elf. I just use 2 healthy and 1 infused. So for now, I use an infused necklace and 2 healthy jewelry. I don't have as much weapon damage, but survivability wise, this thing is a beast, so I never die. And I really like the playstyle of it, and I love the way it works. So this is what I use on the live server right now, and it's an awesome, fun build. Now mine, of course, is a little bit more health, a little bit more stamina, a little bit more magicka, because I do use tri-stat food. I'm just showing you like the best way you can set it up for overall and everything like that. So yeah. But that is the Lord Knight build, guys. I hope you guys like it. It's an awesome solo play build. Just amazing when it comes to that. And it's a solo stamina build, or solo stamina Templar. So it's a really fun one. It's really exciting to play. It's really intense, and it just keeps going. And this thing just doesn't die. No matter how much I try to get mine to die, sometimes I can't get her to die. I also tank with it in small groups and stuff. Sometimes I not only do I tank with it, but I also run a DPS kind of setup with her, so I can help the group with more DPS. I can use her pretty much as anything, whether it be magicka, or sorry, for stamina, DPS, or tank, because of how that build works in both normal and veteran content. So, and if you wanted to set it up a little better, you could go all healthy on the jewelry. You might have to make some adjustments in there with like the Stam recovery, you might, or magic recovery, you might have to change the CP, so you have 43 into, like the, you could do 43 into all three of these and still get by. I just like the 76 here because I love that amount of extra return that it gives you. It's not, that 4% really doesn't make a huge difference, but you do feel the difference. So you could go 43 here, 43 here, and 43 here, and you wouldn't notice much, and you'd get more magic recovery. But when you do that, you have to take from other places, so you have to take this down to 40, and take this up to 43. And once you take this down from 76. So you pretty much, it's going to look like this. And that leaves you 6, which you could put back into here. Sorry, you could put 2 into there and then do this instead and get 11 and 17. You could do that. So you have 43, 43, 43. And then if you look over here, you do end up with a little bit more magic recovery. Same Stam recovery, you know. Nothing else changed. You just get that little bit of extra magic recovery, which kind of plays, like I said, well with the build. So, but again, that is the Lord Knight build, guys. Hope you guys like it. If you do, hit that like button. If you guys want to see more build videos by me or other builds by me, I have a lot more solo builds coming out this week. You can hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.